Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film my top 10 best fiction reads for 2024. I've already filmed my top nonfiction reads, my favorite nonfiction reads for 2024, and that video has already been posted. You can go back and check that one out if you're interested in nonfiction. And this is the fiction, and I believe I have 10 here, 10 books, and I've kind of organized them in random categories that I've selected so that I could have fun while putting this together. So I'm just going to go through them. And to remind everyone, these are just my favorite books for last year. And they are not necessarily books that were published in 2024. So here we go. Let's just get started. The best mystery that I read in 2024 came in December, a late entry to the list. This was With No One as Witness by Elizabeth George. This is book number 13 in the Detective Linley mystery series, which is set in England. And I have been buddy reading this series with Britta Bowler. I love these. And this one particularly is a big turning point in the series. And it's also we have to find a serial killer. And so that was a little bit different than a lot of the other mysteries that we've had previously in this series. And I really enjoyed the chase, the trying to figure out the serial killer. There was a lot of red herrings, and I found this one to be really I really wanted to keep turning the pages. It was definitely a page turner for me. So, and these are long mysteries. These are chunky mysteries, but this one really held my attention and kept me turning the pages to try to figure out what was going on. Best mystery of the year, by far. Okay, best literary fiction novel. No surprise, this has been on everybody's favorite list this year. This is James by Percival Everett. This is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn from the perspective of Jim, the enslaved man that goes with Huckleberry Finn on his adventures. And in this book, we get the story told from James's perspective. And in fact, we get James's story. This isn't Huckleberry's story at all. This is James's story, and a story of what it's like to be an enslaved person in the American South prior to the Civil War. What it was like to have to hide your true nature in order to meet the expectations of the white people around you. What it was like to try to keep your family together in those conditions. What it was like to just be a black man in the world at that point in time. This is funny and poignant and heartbreaking and violent, all of those things as you would expect from a James novel. Of a Percival Everett novel, not a James novel, of a Percival Everett novel. I read The Trees by this author a year or so ago, and I loved that one. And this book I did not find to be as humorous as that one, but I found this one to be more tightly written and more just absolutely enthralling. I just could not put this book down. I thought it was really, really powerful. Then the best climate fiction book that I read this year. Again, no surprise, I just finished this one, I think, in November. This was The Deluge by Stephen Markley. This book I buddy read with Sean from Sean Breathes Books over the course of several months. We took it slow, reading about 50 or 60 pages a week. There are a lot of characters in this. It is a long novel, about 900 pages. It's told in sort of multimedia format. I was trying to see if I could find a page to show you the different styles of storytelling that are in here. This one is a redacted file, government file, and then there's other chapters where there's little inset boxes like this that tell you further information about what's really going on with the characters. And so you're following these 7 or 8 main characters, each chapter told from the perspective of one of these 7 or 8 main characters. And they're telling the story, starts in 2011, 12, 13, somewhere in there, and goes till when does the story end? 2035, I want to say. Yeah, 2030s at the late end of almost 2040. And it's detailing what happens as climate change continues to accelerate and the extreme weather events continue to tick up and become worse and worse, and the impacts of those more horrific every time. And it's the story of the activists and the politicians and the oil company representatives and the PR firms that are all trying to come at this problem from different perspectives. Just incredible. This book was so incredible. The characters in here are just absolutely leaping off the page. The story being told is so realistic and believable. Already there's some things that happen in this book that have, while we were reading the book, events happened that mirrored things that were told in this book. And since we finished reading, more events have happened that have mirrored events in this book. And it's really chilling to have these fictionalized things happening and also happening in the real world at the same time. I just absolutely love this book. I think it's really, really brilliant, and I would love for more people to read it. Then the best feminist novel, and a feminist in that is the best female experience novel that I read last year, and that is A Summer Without Men by Siri Hustvedt. And this novel tells the story of a woman whose husband, she's middle-aged, her husband comes home and says, I want to break from our marriage. I have fallen in love with a young woman that I work with. And the wife in this situation kind of has a breakdown and ends up in the hospital for a little while. And when she comes out of the hospital, she decides to go home to where her mother is living in an assisted living facility, teach a poetry class because she's a writer. And so she's going to teach this poetry creative writing class for a group of like middle grade preteen girls. And she's going to help take care of her mother in this assisted living facility. And she's going to like get her life back together. And so over the course of this one summer, we see her interacting with all these different groups of women, these young girls in her writing class, and like that female experience, those female relationships, and what that is like. And then the relationships of her mother in this care home with other elderly ladies, and they have very rich lives, very rich, lots of things that you would not necessarily expect from older ladies. And so she experiences those female relationships, and then herself, like figuring out what's important to her at this stage in her life. Like she is a mom, and so she has a relationship with her own daughter, and that is part of the story. And I just thought it's so funny. Siri Hustvedt has a very sarcastic wit, which I love in my fiction and always, everywhere. I love it. And I just thought that the way that she tells the story of this woman in her middle-age years, and like all of these things happening around her and how she interacts with all of these different women and showing the experience of women at different ages and stages of their lives. I just loved it. I thought it was great. The next book, I don't have a copy anymore because I lent it to my niece to read, and that's the best cozy fantasy that I read this year. And this one is The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. And this book was such a warm hug of a book. I read this over a 24-hour period in the fall when I just needed to escape from everything. And it is the story of a fantasy world. And in this fantasy world, a young woman is a librarian and in the capital city of the empire, and there's a revolution and a coup, and the revolutionaries are like burning the entire city. And so our librarian like collects a bunch of books and gets in a boat and sails off to the island that she was born on. And she's going to escape to her home island and live in the house that she and her parents used to live in. Her parents are no longer with us. But the house is still there. And so she arrives on this island with her talking spider plant and this boatload of spell books that she's not supposed to have, and tries to rebuild her life. And she just wants to be left alone. She doesn't want to socialize with anyone. She doesn't want to talk with anyone. But the people in this community are not the kind of people that are just going to let her be on her own. And besides that, how is she going to survive in this house? How's she going to make that work? And there's a next door neighbor, a man who is a he ranches, he tends horses, and people. They're horses, actually. They're not people. Horses. And yeah, so he's ranching these horses, and that's part of the story. And there's lots of magical creatures, and it's about found family and friendship and what's important to us, and how to build a community and all that kind of stuff. And it was just fabulous, and I loved it, and I'm so glad that I read it. And then the best science fiction book that I read this year was Systems Collapse by Martha Wells, which is book number 7 in the Murderbot series. And so this is really a recommendation for the entire Murderbot series, because Murderbot is a human artificial intelligence construct. So Murderbot is in the shape of a human, but has artificial intelligence systems, and he was designed, or they were designed, I should say, because there's no gender, they were designed to be a security tool that for hire, basically. And in the beginning of the series, Murderbot like breaks free from those constraints and tries to figure out what they want in life, and how they want to live their lives. All the while, Murderbot is still like really, really good at being a security system and being like basically murdering people and protecting clients and all that sort of stuff. Like Murderbot has lots of tools at their disposal in order to make those sorts of things happen. And the development, again, found family, relationships, learning to care about people, learning to understand what your own wants and needs and desires are. All of that stuff is played into the background of like these adventure stories where Murderbot has to like solve some kind of problem. And it usually has to do with lots of stuff getting blown up and finding other alien or computer type AI systems to bring into the fold. And as we're now in book 7, there's lots of relationships. And so I don't want to get into like the plot details of this book, because you really do need to have read the earlier books in order to understand what's going on in book 7. But as a whole, this series is fabulous. I highly recommend on audiobook. Murderbot is very sarcastic, and you get a lot of their internal thinking. And they would rather be like watching media on their own private feed than like doing most of the stuff that they have to do. It's just so funny and so warm-hearted and fun, and I just love them. So definitely recommend those. And start right from the beginning, because they're just fantastic. And then the best political novel that I read this year was The President and the Frog by Caro de Robertes. And this is a book about hope. And again, in 2024, it was the type of book that I really needed. And this is a book that's based on the real life story of the president of Uruguay. And this is a fictionalized account of that individual's life and career, basically. And so in the story, a former president of a unnamed Latin American country welcomes a reporter into his home to interview him about his life and his politics and his story. And as this interview is happening, the president is flashing back to the time that he spent in prison for fomenting a revolution. And he was in solitary confinement for years and years and years. And during these periods of solitary confinement, he was visited by a frog, and he would have philosophical and existential conversations with this frog. So there's some magical realism here, but not to the extent that I normally find off-putting. This was, this person is in physical distress and like mental distress from having been isolated and put in really horrific conditions for so long. And it's no wonder that sort of internal monologues may be played out, and maybe those internal monologues happened with a frog. But anyway, those conversations that the president has with the frog about, life and politics and what's important and who you go to bat for, and when is it time to give up and just sort of say, that's it, I can't do this any longer. And then the president in the present time being interviewed by this journalist, and him sort of thinking to himself, like, how much of this do I tell this journalist? Fabulous. And like I said, it's just a book about hope and doing the right thing, and how there's still people in the world that for whom doing the right thing is important and the goal of their lives. And I really needed to read that book last year. I thought it was wonderful. The best, sorry, I had a copy of this the whole time and I didn't remember to hold up. So yeah, The President and the Frog by Carolina de Robertis. And I think that author now goes by Caro de Robertis since this book was published. So, and then the best Caribbean novel that I read this past year was a book that we read for Book Naturalist Book Club back in June, and that is The Mermaid, A Black Conch by Monique Rafi. This book was just a delightful story. So this book takes place on an unnamed Caribbean island, and we're following a fisherman, and the fishermen on this island serve sports fishermen that come from wealthier countries to this island just to catch the big one, typically Americans who have lots of money and, just want to spend it on like catching the most rare or the biggest thing that they can find. And one day this fisherman is off by himself off the coast of the island and encounters a mermaid. Later on, this same mermaid is captured by one of these sport fishermen, and our fisherman who saw her first rescues her and brings her to his little house and puts her in the bathtub. And this is a story of what happens next, how the mermaid deals with being on land. She begins to lose her tail. She begins to remember her origin story, where she came from. This is a book about community and how communities impact individuals within that community. It's a story of jealousy, female jealousy towards other females, and the negative impacts of that. It is a story about resource exploitation and how the wealthy feel entitled to everything and are willing to harm people to get what they feel entitled to. It's just a lovely story. And the relationship between the fisherman and the mermaid is so lovely and so heartwarming, and it ends so well. It's really, it's not a, it ends the way you would hope it would. I mean, this is not, I don't want to give away anything, so I don't want to, I'm tiptoeing around, but I just really appreciated the ending of this book, and I appreciated the themes that the author was talking about. I appreciated the look at Caribbean communities that have been so impacted by colonialism and white supremacy and things like that, and just a wonderful story and told in a really compelling way. So definitely recommend that one as well. Of course, all of these books I recommend. The best romance that I read this year was Funny Story by Emily Henry. Now, Emily Henry is super popular and everybody loves her, but her story, Funny Story, published this year, I just thought it was wonderful. It was such a good book. It was the story of Daphne, who is about to get married to Peter. Peter goes off for his bachelor party and comes back and says, sorry, the wedding is off. I realize I'm in love with my childhood best friend, a woman named Petra, and I am kicking you out of our shared home because Petra is going to move in here and we're done. And so Daphne finds herself in this small community that she moved to because Peter wanted to live there, and with nowhere to live. And so she ends up rooming with Petra's ex-boyfriend, a man named Miles, and plot ensues from there because Daphne thinks Miles is a loser and she has never liked him and she thinks he's lame. And so, but she has nowhere else to live, and he has space because Petra has moved out to move in with Peter. And so they commence living together. And of course, over the course of living together, they begin to realize that they never really understood each other at all. And in the middle of this, they decide a fake dating thing happens. And so they're pretending that they've gotten together in order to basically poke at their exes. And so it's that type of a story, a fake dating story, and not an enemies to lovers, but I didn't like you to now I do like you kind of story. And it was so fun. It was just a really fun story. Emily Henry is popular for a reason. She can really tell a great story, and I thought that was a good one. And then lastly, the best historical fiction that I read in 2024 was To the Bright Edge of the World by Eowyn Ivey, which I read way back in January. This is historical novel written in epistolary format, which I love, telling the story of a couple. Let's see if Colonel Alan Forrester. He is stationed in Washington Territory, not yet a state in the United States, and he is tasked with going up to Alaska and exploring and mapping a particular river system. His wife is left behind at the Army fort in Washington Territory, and so they begin to write letters to each other. And she is a really interesting character. Let me see if I can find her name. Sophie. Sophie is an interesting character. Of course, they're hopeful to start a family, but she has other interests as well. She doesn't fit in well with sort of the Army community lifestyle. She has, the women have expectations of what it means to be a military wife, particularly if you're an officer's wife. And Sophie is not down for that. She wants to have something to do. I mean, what she's really interested in is photography. And so she starts to explore that particular aspect. And all the while, her husband is encouraging her from afar in his letters. And he, on the other hand, is experiencing this really life-threatening trip up this river in Alaska, learning about the native communities that he encounters, the wildlife that he encounters. There's lots of great nature writing in this book. Lovely story being told between Sophie and Alan, and also like a framing story of an old man in the present day who's trying to give these documents, these letters from these two people that he has come into possession of, to a museum, and the museum personnel going back and forth with this gentleman about his documents and stuff. So there's letters and there's photos and there's documents. And it's all just, I love a story told like that. And this one's done so well, again, with great nature writing, and a really great look at what it was like to be a woman in the 1800s. Was this 1800s? 1885, so late 1800s, and wanting more than just to be a wife and mother, wanting to have outside occupation. Fantastic. Really loved it. So those are the novels that I read in 2024 that I really enjoyed, my favorite ones of the year. I hope there's some in there that you can find of interest to you. I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read. I'll talk to you later.